The air in the pine-scented clearing was thick with anticipation, a buzzing energy that crackled like static before a storm. It was the night of the mating ceremony, the most important night in a young wolf's life, and the entire night Fang pack had gathered under the swollen, silver eye of the full moon. Torches flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that made the ancient trees seem alive. From the edge of the woods, Sasha watched, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She felt like a ghost at a feast, present but utterly separate from the joy and excitement humming through the crowd. She was tucked away in her usual spot, a small hollow between the gnarled roots of an old oak tree, a place she'd claimed as her own since she was a pup. It was far enough from the central fire to be shrouded in darkness, close enough to see everything. She pulled her thin woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, a feeble defense against the chill of the night and the colder stares of her packmates. Sasha was different. Everyone in the Night Fang pack knew it. While other girls her age had burst into their powerful wolf forms at 16, Sasha's skin had remained just skin. Her bones had never cracked and reshaped, her teeth had never elongated into fangs. She was 18 summers old and had never once felt the wild, primal urge of the shift. Because of this, she was not Sasha the loyal or Sasha the kind. She was Sasha the weak. Sasha the human lover. The one who preferred the quiet company of books and the hidden languages of forest plants to the rough-and-tumble games of the younger wolves. She was an orphan, her parents lost to a rogue attack years ago, and with no family to defend her, she had become the pack's easiest target. Her only shield was her best friend, Bree, whose fierce loyalty was the one warm spot in Sasha's lonely world. But even Bree was out there now, in the thick of the celebration, her laughter ringing out clear and bright. The ceremony was beginning. Alpha Jet, a man with muscles like knotted rope and a smile that never reached his cold eyes, stood on a raised wooden platform at the head of the clearing. He raised his arms, and the crowd fell into an immediate, respectful silence. Tonight, his voice boomed, echoing through the trees, the moon goddess will bless her children. Tonight, fates will be sealed, and bonds will be forged that will strengthen our pack for generations to come. A cheer erupted, a wave of sound that made Sasha flinch. She watched as one by one, the unmated wolves of her pack stepped into the sacred circle drawn in the earth. They would stand there, barefoot on the cool soil, and open their senses, hoping to feel the pull, the undeniable magnetic draw toward their destined mate. She saw Mara, with her confident smirk, lock eyes with a strong warrior from a neighboring pack. A spark seemed to jump between them, and they moved toward each other as if pulled by strings, their hands meeting to the approving roar of the crowd. The ritual was working. Pairs were forming. Each successful match was another reminder of her own failure. She was here only because pack law demanded every unmated wolf of age must participate. It was a cruel formality, a public humiliation she was forced to endure. She knew the script. She would step into the circle. Nothing would happen. The silence would stretch. And then the laughter would start. It was a ritual of its own, and her part was to play the fool. "Where do you think you're hiding, little mouse?" The voice, slick and mocking, came from right above her. She didn't need to look up to know it was Jet. He had spotted her. He always did. He leaned against her oak tree, his arms crossed, looking down at her with an expression of pure amusement. "The ceremony is for wolves, Sasha. Not for little girls who play in the dirt. But rules are rules. Don't worry. It'll be over quickly. Your lack of a wolf will be noted, and then you can go back to your herbs and daydreams." He pushed off from the tree and walked away, his laughter joining the sounds of the festival. Tears of shame and anger pricked at Sasha's eyes, but she fiercely willed them away. She would not give him the satisfaction. She hugged her knees to her chest, making herself as small as possible, wishing the earth would open up and swallow her whole. She wanted to run, to flee back to the tiny, secluded cottage she called home, to bury herself under her blankets and never come out. Just then, a whirlwind of energy and warmth plopped down beside her. It was Bree. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, her eyes sparkling. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. Isn't it amazing? Liam from the Stone River pack just found his mate. Did you see it?" Sasha could only manage a weak nod. "It's wonderful, Bree. Really." Bree's smile faded as she saw the misery on her friend's face. She nudged her shoulder gently. "Hey, none of that. You have to go out there." "I can't," Sasha whispered, her voice trembling. "You know what will happen. It's just another way for them to point and laugh." "I know it's hard," Bree said, her tone softening into one of fierce determination. "I know they're horrible. But listen to me. This is your chance. Your only chance. What if your mate isn't from our pack? What if he's from somewhere else and he's here tonight waiting for you? If you don't step into that circle, you'll never know. You can't let Jet and the others steal your future. You deserve a happy ending just as much as anyone else out there. Sasha looked into her friend's earnest face. The logic was fragile, a thin hope built on a dream, but it was all she had. The alternative was a lifetime of this loneliness, of being an outcast in her own home. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Bree was right. She had to try. She had to know for sure. With legs that felt like they were made of stone, Sasha pushed herself to her feet. She smoothed down her simple dress, the plainest one at the ceremony. She walked away from the safety of her oak tree and began the long, slow walk toward the center of the clearing. As she moved through the crowd, the celebratory noises around her began to change. The laughter died down. The music faltered. Conversations hushed into whispers. All eyes turned to her. She heard the snickers, the muttered insults. What is she doing? This is embarrassing. Someone should stop her. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead on the circle of trampled grass. It felt like miles away. Her face burned with a humiliation so complete it was a physical pain. Alpha Jet watched her approach, his arms crossed, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He made no move to stop her. He was enjoying the spectacle. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached the edge of the sacred circle. She paused for one last second, sending a silent, desperate prayer to the moon goddess. Please, please just this once. Don't let me be alone. She stepped into the circle. The moment her bare feet touched the cool, packed earth inside the ring, a strange thing happened. For a single, heart-stopping second she thought she felt something. A faint warmth, a distant hum, like a string on a guitar being plucked very far away. She held her breath, her hope daring to flare. But then nothing. The feeling vanished, leaving behind only the empty silence of the night. The hum was replaced by the sound of the wind in the pines. The warmth was gone, leaving only the chill of the air. The silence from the crowd was no longer curious. It was heavy, judgmental, and stifling. It stretched on for 1 second, then 2, then 5. It was the silence of confirmed failure. And then, as she knew it would, the laughter began. It started as a few scattered chuckles, then grew into a roaring, mean-spirited wave of sound that crashed over her. It was louder and crueler than she had ever imagined. Tears she could no longer hold back streamed down her cheeks. Her body trembled. This was it. This was her proof. She was no one's mate. She was nothing. Over the roar of the crowd, Alpha Jet's voice cut through, sharp and triumphant. See? I told you all. Nothing but a weak, human-loving child. The moon goddess doesn't even acknowledge her. Now get out of the circle. You're wasting everyone's time. His words were the final blow. Broken, utterly defeated, Sasha wrapped her arms around herself and turned to flee, to run away from the laughter, the stares, the crushing weight of her destiny. She just had to get away. But as she took her first stumbling step out of the circle, a sound unlike any other ripped through the night, so powerful and commanding that it instantly and completely silenced every single laugh. It was the deep, thunderous, and utterly furious growl of an alpha. But not just any alpha. The laughter that had been a roaring, suffocating wave crashing over Sasha froze in an instant. It didn't fade, it was severed as if a blade had cut through the very sound itself. The air, which a moment before had been vibrating with mockery, went utterly still and heavy, charged with a new, terrifying energy. Every head, which had been turned toward Sasha in ridicule, now swiveled in unison toward the source of that sound. It was a growl that seemed to originate from the earth itself, a low, rumbling promise of power that made the torches flicker and the bones of every wolf present vibrate in primal recognition. All eyes were locked on the raised platform where the visiting alphas observed the ritual. Specifically, they were locked on the man who had risen from his ornate, throne-like chair. Alpha King Corbin. He was a mountain of a man, taller and broader than any other in the clearing, and he seemed to suck all the light and sound from the space around him. His presence was a physical weight. His jaw was clenched tight, the muscle there twitching. But it was his eyes that held the entire pack captive. They were no longer their usual sharp, observant gray. They glowed with an unearthly, brilliant gold light, the sign of a wolf risen to the surface, and they were not looking at the ceremony or at Alpha Jet or at the crowd. They were pinned, with an intensity that was almost violent, on Sasha. Sasha herself had frozen mid-flight, her body still turned away from the circle, one foot lifted to run. The command in that growl had been absolute, a primal order that her very cells, human or not, could not disobey. She slowly, tremblingly turned back around. Her tear-filled eyes widened as she saw him. The Alpha King was moving. He descended the steps from the platform with a predator's grace, each step deliberate and powerful. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's prow, wolves stumbling backward to clear a path, their heads bowing in instinctive submission. He paid them no mind. His entire world had seemingly narrowed to the trembling girl in the center of the trampled grass. He walked right past Alpha Jet, who stood with his mouth slightly agape, his smirk wiped away and replaced by a look of pure, uncomprehending confusion. Corbin didn't even glance at him. His focus was absolute. The silence was so profound Sasha could hear the crackle of the distant fire and the frantic beating of her own heart. He stepped across the boundary of the sacred circle, his large frame making the space feel suddenly very small. He stopped mere inches from her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the clean, wild scent of pine and frost that clung to him. He looked down at her, and the golden glow in his eyes softened just a fraction. He saw the tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks, saw the way her entire body shook with residual humiliation and fear. His expression, which had been a mask of fierce possessiveness, gentled. He reached out one hand, his movements slow and deliberate as if approaching a frightened animal. He didn't touch her yet. He simply held his hand palm up between them, an offer, not a demand. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, meant for her and her alone, yet it carried in the dead silence, reaching every stunned ear in the clearing. "Look at me," he said, his tone not an order but a low, compelling request. Sasha, her breath caught in her throat, forced her gaze up to meet his glowing eyes. The world, the mocking crowd, the furious jet, the entire forest, melted away. There was only the bottomless depth of his gold-flecked gaze. "For my entire life," Corbin began, his voice gaining strength, now meant for everyone to hear, "I have been surrounded by power. I have fought powerful warriors. I have treated with powerful alphas. I have been presented with powerful she-wolves, all hoping to be chosen as my Luna Queen." He paused, his eyes never leaving Sasha's. "I was looking for a mate whose strength would match my own. I was looking for the flash of lightning, the crash of thunder." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "I was looking for the wrong thing." He finally moved his hand, not to grab hers, but to gently, so gently, brush away the tears staining her cheek with the pad of his thumb. The touch was electric, sending a shockwave of warmth through Sasha's entire frozen body. It was the first touch from anyone in years that wasn't meant to push her away or cause pain. "My wolf," Corbin continued, his voice dropping again into that intimate rumble, "is not calm around thunder. He is calm in the silence after the storm. He is not stirred by lightning. He is soothed by the gentle glow of the moon." He finally took her hand, his large, calloused fingers enveloping hers with a warmth that felt like safety. "All this time I was searching for a reflection of my own power. But the moon goddess, in her wisdom, did not give me my mirror. She gave me my balance." He raised his voice again, turning his head just slightly to address the utterly stunned Alpha Jet and the speechless assembly. "This woman's strength is not of the tooth and claw. It is a quieter strength, a deeper one. It is the strength of a heart that has endured cruelty and remained kind. It is the strength to stand in a circle alone, facing the laughter of hundreds, because a friend asked her to have hope." He looked back at Sasha, and his gaze was so full of awe and certainty it made her dizzy. "That is the strength an Alpha King needs by his side. That is the strength I claim." Alpha Jet finally found his voice, sputtering with indignation. "My king. This is an absurdity. She is a nobody. A weakling from my pack who cannot even shift. She is not fit." Corbin cut him off, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that held no gentleness now, only absolute authority. "You will not speak of my chosen mate in that way." The threat in those words was colder than the winter wind. "Her worth is not for you to decide. The moon goddess has presented her to me. My wolf has chosen her. That is the only law that matters." He turned his back on Jet, a deliberate and stunning dismissal of another alpha. His attention returned fully to Sasha. "The ritual is complete," he announced to the world, though his eyes were only for her. "The bond is recognized." He lifted their joined hands, presenting her to the silent, shocked world. Not as a prize he had won, but as a queen he had discovered. The girl they had all mocked moments ago was now standing hand in hand with the most powerful wolf in the land, bathed in the light of his protection and his astonishing claim. The silence that followed was no longer mocking. It was the silence of awe, of fear, of world-shattering change. Sasha, holding the king's hand, could only stare up at him, her world tilting on its axis, every truth she had ever known crumbling away into dust. The silence that had fallen over the mating ceremony was a fragile, crystalline thing, so complete that the rustle of a leaf from the surrounding forest sounded like a thunderclap. Sasha stood frozen, her small hand completely enveloped by the Alpha King's large, warm one. She could feel the rough calluses on his palm, the latent strength in his grip that was so careful, so deliberately gentle, as if he were holding a precious, fragile bird. Her mind was a roaring blank, a white noise static of shock and disbelief. This had to be a dream, a cruel and beautiful trick her desperate mind had conjured to save her from the humiliation. Any second now she would wake up in her cold, lonely bed. But the pressure of his hand was real. The heat radiating from his body was real. The scent of him, clean winter air, aged leather, and something uniquely wild and masculine, was undeniably, overwhelmingly real. She dared to glance up at his face. The fierce golden glow had faded from his eyes, leaving behind a sharp, intelligent gray, like the sea under a stormy sky. And those eyes were fixed on her with an expression she could not decipher. It wasn't pity. It wasn't mockery. It was a deep, intense curiosity, mixed with a possessiveness that should have terrified her but instead sent a strange, warm tremor through her core. The spell was broken by Alpha Jet. His face, which had been pale with shock, was now mottled with a furious, purple rage. He took a step forward, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. "King Corbin," he said, his voice strained, struggling to maintain a veneer of respect. "With all due respect to your station, this is a mistake. A grave error. This girl, Sasha, she's a liability. She has no wolf. She has no family. She contributes nothing to any pack. To take her as your mate, it would be an embarrassment to your royal standing. The Crimson Shadow Pack would never accept it." He gestured wildly toward her, his contempt palpable. "She is broken." Corbin did not release Sasha's hand. He didn't even turn to fully face Jet. Instead, he angled his body slightly, placing himself more squarely between Sasha and the fuming Alpha, a clear, physical barrier. His voice, when he spoke, was deceptively calm, but it carried a chilling edge of absolute authority that made several wolves in the front row take an involuntary step back. "Are you questioning the will of the moon goddess, Alpha Jet?" Corbin asked, his tone dangerously soft. "Are you suggesting that my wolf, the wolf of your king, is so feeble-minded that it cannot recognize its own true mate?" He let the questions hang in the air, and the implied challenge was more terrifying than any shout. "You speak of embarrassment. The only embarrassment I see here is an Alpha so blind to the true strength in his own pack that he allows a treasure to be trampled into the dirt." His gaze swept over the crowd, taking in their stunned faces. "The Crimson Shadow Pack follows my lead. They will honor my choice as will every pack under my protection. That is the end of the discussion." He finally turned his head, and his gray eyes locked onto Jet's. "The girl, Sasha, is under my protection now. She leaves with me tonight. You will release all claim to her. Is that understood?" It was not a request. It was a royal decree. Jet's jaw worked, his teeth grinding audibly. He wanted to argue, to fight, but the power rolling off Corbin was immense, an ancient, dominant force that demanded obedience. To challenge him now would be suicide. After a long, tense moment, Jet gave a stiff, jerky nod, his eyes burning with hatred. He shot one last venomous look at Sasha before turning on his heel and stalking away, his followers scrambling after him like chastised pups. The tension in the clearing broke. A low murmur began to rise from the crowd, a mix of awe, confusion, and frantic speculation. Corbin ignored it all. His attention returned to Sasha. He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face, his expression softening once more into that unreadable curiosity. "We will leave now," he said, his voice quiet again for her ears only. "There is nothing for you here." Sasha's mind finally began to thaw, and with it came a tidal wave of panic. "Leave? Now? With him? To go where?" Her eyes frantically scanned the crowd, searching for one familiar, friendly face. "Bree," she whispered, her voice hoarse from unshed tears. "My friend. I have to say goodbye." Corbin followed her gaze and gave a short, sharp nod. He didn't let go of her hand, but he turned slightly, making space. "Be quick." At that moment, Bree burst through the ring of onlookers, her eyes wide as saucers, her expression a hilarious mix of utter shock and dawning, ecstatic joy. She didn't bow or curtsy to the king. She ran straight to Sasha and threw her arms around her, squeezing her tightly. "Sasha, Oh my moon. I told you. I told you something would happen, she whispered fiercely into Sasha's ear, her voice trembling with excitement. The Alpha King. Can you believe it? Sasha clung to her, her anchor in this suddenly upside-down world. I can't, she choked out. Bree, I'm scared. I don't understand what's happening. Don't be scared, Bree said, pulling back to hold her by the shoulders, her grip firm and reassuring. This is the most amazing thing that has ever happened. He's magnificent. And he saw you. He really saw you. She glanced over Sasha's shoulder at the patient, imposing figure of the king and gave a little odd shiver. You have to go. Write to me. Promise you'll write to me every single day. I promise, Sasha said, fresh tears welling up, but these were different. They were tears of loss for the only friend she had ever known, mixed with a terrifying, thrilling sliver of hope. Corbin gave a gentle, clearing of his throat. It was time. Bree immediately released her, taking a respectful step back and dipping her head toward the king. Sasha felt his hand, warm and certain, take hers again. He began to lead her away from the sacred circle, away from the staring eyes of the Night Fang pack, toward the edge of the clearing where his royal guard stood waiting, their postures rigid and alert. The walk through the crowd was surreal. Where before there had been mocking laughter, now there was a deep, respectful silence. Where there had been contemptuous stares, now there were lowered eyes and bowed heads. They weren't bowing to her, she knew. They were bowing to him, to his choice, to the overwhelming power he represented. But for the first time in her life she was included in that respect. She was on the right side of the line. They reached a magnificent, dark-coated horse, much larger than any she had ever seen. Corbin released her hand only to place his own on the small of her back, a steadying, guiding touch. Can you ride? He asked. Sasha shook her head mutely. She'd never even been this close to a horse. Without a hint of annoyance, Corbin simply nodded. He placed his hands on her waist. Her breath hitched at the intimate contact. Then, with an effortless strength that stole the air from her lungs, he lifted her onto the horse's back as if she weighed no more than a child. She gripped the saddle horn, her knuckles white. He swung up behind her in one fluid motion, his chest pressing against her back, his arms coming around her to take the reins. She was surrounded by him, enveloped in his heat and his scent and his impossible reality. He clicked his tongue and the horse moved forward, the guards falling into formation around them. Sasha didn't look back at the clearing, at the pack that had been her prison. She kept her eyes fixed forward, on the dark path ahead that led into the unknown. The forest closed around them, the sounds of the ceremony fading into the distance, replaced by the steady clop of the horse's hooves and the rhythm of the Alpha King's breathing. She was leaving everything she had ever known. She was terrified. But cradled in the circle of his arms for the first time, she also felt something else, something fragile and new. She felt safe. The forest was a dark, living tunnel around them, the canopy of ancient trees so thick it blotted out the moon and stars, leaving only the faint, bobbing light of the torches carried by the riders at the front of their small procession. The air was cold and carried the rich, damp scent of decaying leaves and dark earth. The only sounds were the steady, rhythmic clop of the horse's hooves on the packed trail, the jingle of tack, the occasional snort from one of the animals, and the deep, even sound of Corbin's breathing behind her. Sasha was hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. The solid wall of his chest against her back, the firm muscle of his thighs bracketing her own, the way his arms, as he held the reins, created a cage around her that felt not like a prison but like a fortress. She sat rigidly, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too deeply and somehow break whatever impossible spell had been cast over the night. Her mind was a whirlwind, replaying the last hour on a frantic, dizzying loop. The laughter, the tears, the growl, the touch of his hand, the look in his eyes. It was too much to process. It was a dream, a fairy tale, and she was waiting to wake up and find herself back in her dusty cottage, alone. You can relax, his voice rumbled, low and close to her ear, making her jump slightly. He wasn't shouting, but in the intimate silence, it felt as though he had. I won't let you fall. His voice, that deep, calm baritone, was somehow both a command and a comfort. Sasha realized she was gripping the saddle horn so tightly her fingers ached. She forced herself to loosen her grip, to unclench her jaw, to take a deeper breath that filled her lungs with his scent. Pine and frost and something uniquely male. It was strangely calming. Where? She began, her own voice a thin, reedy thing compared to his. She cleared her throat and tried again. Where are we going? Home, he said, and the word was simple, yet it held a weight that resonated deep within her. To my territory. The Crimson Shadow Pack lands. It's a journey of several days by horse. Several days. Alone with him. With these silent, imposing guards. The thought sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. What is it like? She asked, needing to fill the silence to anchor herself with information. It is strong, he said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. It is built into the side of a mountain, overlooking a wide river and a deep forest. The walls are made of stone and ancient timber. It is safe. It is well defended. He paused for a moment, and when he spoke again his tone was thoughtful. It can also be cold. The stone holds the winter chill. But the great hall always has a fire burning. You will have your own rooms. You can make them warm. Your own rooms. The words were a relief and a strange disappointment all at once. She would have a space of her own. A door to close. But it also meant separation. This closeness, this terrifying, exhilarating proximity was temporary. They rode in silence for a while longer. Sasha's body began to ache from the unfamiliar posture and the constant motion. She was tired, a deep exhaustion that seeped into her bones, a leftover from the emotional storm of the ceremony. Despite her efforts to stay upright, her head began to nod, her eyelids growing heavy. She didn't realize she was leaning back against him until his arm tightened slightly around her, adjusting his hold to better support her weight. Sleep, he murmured, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. The journey is long. Rest. It was the last thing she expected him to say. She expected demands, questions, an interrogation about her lack of a wolf, about her life, about why the moon goddess would possibly pair him with someone like her. But he offered only silence and the permission to rest. The tension finally, completely drained from her body. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait, the solid warmth of him at her back, the deep, even sound of his heartbeat against her spine, it all conspired against her. Her eyes fluttered shut. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt protected. Watched over. She stopped fighting and let the darkness take her, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep cradled in the arms of the Alpha King. She woke to the gray light of dawn filtering through the trees. They were no longer moving. She was still on the horse, but Corbin was dismounting, his movements careful so as not to jostle her. They were in a small hidden clearing where a stream bubbled over smooth stones. The guards were already seeing to the horses, their movements efficient and quiet. Corbin turned and reached up for her. Still bleary with sleep, she slid down from the horse's back, his hands firm on her waist guiding her descent until her feet touched the soft moss of the forest floor. Her legs, stiff and unused to riding, immediately buckled. He caught her effortlessly, holding her upright until she found her balance, his hands lingering for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she whispered, her face flushing. She felt clumsy and young next to his easy grace. He simply nodded and handed her a water skin. "Drink. The water is fresh." While the guards unpacked travel rations, dried meat, hard cheese, and bread, Corbin led her to the stream's edge. He watched as she knelt and splashed the cold, clear water on her face, washing away the dust and dried tears of the previous night. He didn't hover, but his presence was a constant, watchful thing. She felt his eyes on her, not with judgment, but with that same intense curiosity. They ate in silence, sitting on a fallen log. Sasha was painfully aware of the guards, who kept a respectful distance but whose occasional, curious glances made her skin prickle. She was the strange, silent girl their king had plucked from obscurity. She could only imagine what they were thinking. It was Corbin who broke the silence. "Tell me about your friend," he said. "Bree." The question surprised her. Of all the things he could ask, he asked about Bree. She looked down at the piece of cheese in her hand. "She's my only friend," she said softly. "The only one who was ever kind. She was the one who made me go to the ceremony. She told me I had to have hope." She risked a glance at him. "I thought she was being foolish." "A true friend's hope is never foolish," he said, his voice low. "It is a powerful thing. It is what brought you to me." He fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now, not an empty one. He had drawn a connection between her old life and this new one, and it made the vast, frightening unknown feel just a little bit smaller. After they had eaten and the horses were watered, it was time to move on. Corbin helped her back onto the horse, his hands sure and steady on her waist. As they set off again, the sun finally breaking through the trees and painting the forest floor in dappled gold, Sasha felt a shift within herself. The initial, paralyzing shock was fading, replaced by a nervous, thrumming curiosity. She was traveling with the king to a new home. A home he had said could be hers. She leaned back just a little into the solid warmth of him, and for the first time she dared to look forward into the light of the new day, instead of back into the darkness of the past. The journey stretched into days, a blur of endless forest trails, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, and the constant solid presence of Corbin at her back. The landscape began to change, the gentle rolling hills giving way to steeper, more dramatic terrain. The air grew sharper, colder, carrying the scent of stone and snow from the distant, brooding mountains they were approaching. Sasha's body ached from the relentless travel, but her mind was slowly beginning to emerge from its shell of shock, becoming more alert, more observant. On the afternoon of the third day, they reached the crest of a high pass. Corbin reined the horse to a halt. "Look," he said, his voice a quiet command. Sasha's breath caught in her throat. Spread out before them in the valley below was the Crimson Shadow Pack's stronghold. It was nothing like the scattered wooden huts and the single meeting hall of the Night Fang territory. This was a fortress. It was built into the very face of the mountain itself, a breathtaking combination of nature and formidable craftsmanship. High, sheer walls of dark gray stone rose from the cliffside, topped with sturdy wooden watchtowers where sentries stood as still as statues. A wide, rushing river curled around the base of the mountain like a shimmering silver ribbon, acting as a natural moat. The main structure, a vast complex of interconnected buildings with steep, slate-tiled roofs, seemed to grow out of the rock. Smoke curled from numerous chimneys, and even from this distance, Sasha could see the organized bustle of a large, thriving community. It was powerful, imposing, and utterly terrifying. "The royal den," Corbin said, a note of pride in his voice. "It has stood for 500 years. No enemy has ever taken these walls." He urged the horse forward, beginning the careful descent down the switchback trail that led to the main gate. As they drew closer, the scale of the place became truly overwhelming. The main gates were massive constructs of reinforced ironwood, currently standing open but looking as though they could withstand a siege. The guards stationed there snapped to attention as Corbin approached, their fists thumping against their chests in a unified, respectful salute. Their eyes, however, flickered past their king to land on Sasha, filled with open curiosity and a wariness she could feel like a physical touch. They passed through the gates into a wide, cobblestone courtyard. Activity seemed to freeze for a heartbeat as they entered. Warriors training with weapons paused their drills. Women tending to large cooking fires over open pits stopped stirring their pots. Children chasing a ball skidded to a halt. Every single person turned to stare. The silence was profound, heavy with unasked questions. Sasha felt a hot flush of self-consciousness crawl up her neck. She was a dirty, travel-worn stranger in a simple, plain dress, sitting before their king. She wanted to shrink, to disappear. Corbin's voice cut through the silence, calm and authoritative, meant for everyone. "As you were." It was a simple command, but it held the expectation of immediate obedience. Slowly, hesitantly, the pack returned to their tasks, though the stolen glances continued. He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Her legs, stiff and sore, nearly gave way again, and his hand shot out to steady her elbow, holding her upright. He did not let go as he led her across the courtyard toward the largest of the stone buildings, its great doors carved with intricate scenes of wolves running under a full moon. The inside was even more impressive. They stepped into a vast great hall. A massive fire roared in a stone fireplace large enough to stand in, the heat from it a welcome relief from the mountain chill. Tapestries depicting battles and histories lined the walls, and the high-beamed ceiling was lost in shadow. The hall was empty save for a few servants who stopped and bowed deeply as Corbin passed. He led her away from the main hall, down a quieter corridor lined with heavy wooden doors. He stopped before one and pushed it open. "These will be your rooms," he said, guiding her inside. Sasha stepped over the threshold and simply stared. It was a suite larger than her entire cottage back home. A main sitting area held a comfortable-looking sofa and chairs arranged before a smaller, cheerfully crackling fire. A wooden table was set with a pitcher of water and a bowl of fruit. Through an open doorway she could see a large bed piled with furs and blankets. Another door stood ajar, revealing a private bathing room with a deep, copper tub. It was warm, clean, and beautiful. And it was hers. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair stepped forward and bowed. "My lady, I am Marta. I am here to attend to you." She gestured toward the bathing room. "I have drawn a hot bath for you and there are fresh clothes laid out." Sasha looked from Marta to Corbin, overwhelmed. He was still standing in the doorway watching her reaction. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, her voice thin. "Rest," Corbin said. "Marta will see to your needs. I will have food sent to you. We will speak more tomorrow." He gave a short, respectful nod, and then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, leaving her alone in the grandeur of her new prison. Or was it her new sanctuary? Marta was efficient and gentle. She helped Sasha out of her travel-stained clothes and into the blessedly hot, scented water of the tub. Sasha sank into the warmth, letting it soak the aches from her muscles and the grime from her skin. Marta washed her hair with lavender-scented soap, the act so simple and nurturing that Sasha felt tears well up in her eyes. No one had taken care of her like this since her mother had died. After her bath, wrapped in a soft, thick robe, she found that a tray of food had been delivered: roasted chicken, steaming vegetables, fresh bread, and a cup of sweet wine. She ate at the small table by the fire, every bite feeling like a miracle. Marta quietly laid out a nightdress of the finest, softest cotton she had ever felt, then discreetly left her alone. Sasha walked to the window and pushed open the heavy shutters. The view took her breath away. She was high up, looking out over the entire fortress and the valley beyond, the river a silver thread in the moonlight. The air was cold and clean. This was her life now. This strange, luxurious room, this powerful, enigmatic man, this pack of strangers who looked at her with suspicion. She was no longer Sasha the weak. She was Sasha, the Alpha King's chosen mate. The title felt like a coat that was too large and heavy for her, borrowed from someone else. She didn't know how to wear it yet. As she climbed into the unbelievably soft bed, pulling the furs up to her chin, she was surrounded by physical comfort she had never known. But her mind was racing, trying to find its footing in this new, bewildering world. She was safe. She was warm. She was cared for. But who was she supposed to be now? The question echoed in the silence of the grand room, unanswered. The days that followed Sasha's arrival at the Crimson Shadow stronghold settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. She was treated with a formal, distant respect by everyone she encountered. Servants like Marta were unfailingly polite and efficient, seeing to her every need before she even had to ask. Warriors and pack members she passed in the corridors would bow their heads, but their eyes would quickly dart away, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She was a puzzle to them, a quiet, unassuming girl who their fierce king had inexplicably brought home and installed in the royal wing. The rumors she knew must be flying, but they never reached her ears. She ate her meals in the solitude of her rooms, wandered the inner courtyards when the weather permitted, and spent long hours staring out her window at the breathtaking, intimidating view. She was a guest in a gilded cage, waiting for something, anything, to happen. On the fifth morning, a firm knock sounded on her door. It was too early for Marta, and the knock was too assertive. Sasha opened it to find Corbin himself filling the doorway. He was dressed not in his formal alpha attire, but in simple, sturdy trousers and a dark tunic that stretched across his broad shoulders. He looked more like a rugged hunter than a king, and the casual power he exuded was, if possible, even more potent. "Come," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The sun is out. I will show you the territory." A flutter of nervousness went through her, but also a spark of anticipation. It was the first time he had sought her out since that first night. She simply nodded, grabbing her shawl and following him out into the corridor. He did not lead her through the main courtyards where everyone gathered. Instead, he took her through a smaller, more discreet gate at the back of the stronghold, one that opened directly onto a path that wound up the mountainside. The moment they stepped outside the walls, the world changed. The crisp, thin air filled her lungs, scented with pine and the dampness of the mountain stone. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on the gravel path and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. For a long time they walked in silence. Corbin matched his long strides to her shorter ones without comment. He didn't try to make conversation, and Sasha, her nerves stretched taut, couldn't think of a single thing to say. She simply followed, her eyes taking in the stunning wilderness around her. She saw ancient trees with trunks wider than she was tall, and delicate, hardy flowers pushing their way through cracks in the rock. It was a land of fierce, stark beauty. After they had climbed to a high ledge that offered a panoramic view of the entire valley, Corbin finally stopped. He turned to her, his gray eyes thoughtful as he watched her take in the vista. "This land," he began, his voice calm and measured, "is not just a place to live. It is a living thing. To be an alpha or an alpha's mate is to understand it. To listen to it." He pointed to a distant stand of trees. "The deer move through there at dawn. The river below is full of salmon when the season is right. The western ridge is vulnerable to rock slides after heavy rain. These are things you must know. Not from a book. From the land itself." Sasha listened, captivated. No one had ever spoken to her about leadership like this, Not as a title but as a connection. It was about paying attention. It was about understanding the quiet details. He turned his gaze fully on her. "Why did you come to the ceremony, Sasha?" he asked. "When you knew what would likely happen. Why did you step into that circle?" The question was direct, and it pierced through the calm of the morning. She looked down at her hands, twisting the fabric of her shawl. "Bree made me," she whispered. "Bree may have urged you," he corrected gently but firmly. "But she did not carry you. Your feet moved on their own." "Why?" Tears pricked at her eyes. She thought of the loneliness, the years of silence and scorn. She found a courage she didn't know she possessed and met his gaze. "Because I was hoping," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "I was hoping that just once I would be wrong about myself. I was hoping that maybe there was a place I belonged." Corbin watched her, and something in his expression shifted, softened. "Hope is not a weakness," he said, echoing his words from days before. "It is a relentless kind of courage." He took a step closer to her. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with a new, tense energy. "My wolf is not a gentle creature, Sasha. He is ancient and dominant and restless. For centuries, the kings of my line have taken mates of immense power to match that restlessness. It has always been a clash of titans. A constant struggle for dominance." He was so close now she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, feel the warmth of his body despite the cool mountain air. "But with you," he continued, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble that vibrated deep in her chest. "He is quiet. For the first time in my life, my wolf is at peace. He is not looking for a fight. He is home." He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. His fingers, calloused and warm, brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, tucking it gently behind her ear. The touch was electrifying, sending a jolt of pure heat through her entire body. Sasha's breath hitched. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She should be scared. She should step back. But she was rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the raw honesty in his eyes, by the tenderness in his touch. "I feel it too," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips for a heartbeat before returning to hers. "The pull. The bond. It is a quiet hum under my skin that grows louder every time I am near you." He leaned in closer, his head dipping toward hers. The world narrowed to his face, his scent, the promise in his eyes. This was it. He was going to kiss her. And every fiber of her being was screaming for her to let him. But at the last possible second he stopped. His eyes searched hers, seeing the fear that still warred with the desire there. He let out a soft, controlled breath and pulled back just an inch, his hand falling away from her face. "Not yet," he whispered, his voice thick with a restraint that seemed to cost him dearly. "I will not rush this. I will not rush you." The moment broke. The spell was still there, shimmering in the air between them, but he had chosen to hold it at bay. He offered her a small, almost sad smile. "Have faith in this," he said, repeating his words from their first meeting. "Have faith in me." He turned and began to walk back down the path, giving her space, giving her time to process the earthquake he had just unleashed within her. Sasha stood frozen on the ledge, her cheeks still burning where his fingers had touched her, her lips aching with the kiss that hadn't happened. The quiet of the mountain returned, but it was a different quiet now. It was filled with the echo of his words and the terrifying, thrilling understanding that whatever was growing between them was real, it was powerful, and it was only just beginning. The air in the stronghold, which had felt so still and watchful before, now seemed to hum with a new, unspoken tension. For Sasha, every corridor, every room, was now filled with the ghost of Corbin's almost kiss, the memory of his touch on her skin like a brand. She moved through her days in a daze, her mind constantly replaying that moment on the mountain ledge, the intensity in his eyes, the rough gentleness of his fingers, the devastating control he had exerted to pull away. She found herself listening for the sound of his footsteps in the hall, her heart giving a foolish little leap every time a tall, broad-shouldered figure passed by, only to settle again when it wasn't him. He was giving her space as he'd promised, but his absence felt like a presence all its own. 3 days after their walk, a different kind of tension arrived. It came in the form of pounding hooves and the loud, arrogant voices of unfamiliar wolves. Sasha, who was arranging winter herbs in the great hall under Marta's guidance, looked up as the main doors were thrown open. A group of warriors clad in the dark leathers and grim insignia of the Night Fang pack marched in. And at their head, his face a mask of smug superiority, was Alpha Jet. He strode into the center of the hall as if he owned it, his eyes scanning the room with contempt before landing on Sasha. A cruel smile twisted his lips. Well. The little mouse looks comfortable in her new cage. Enjoying the king's charity while it lasts, are we? Before Sasha could even form a response, a door at the far end of the hall opened. Corbin emerged. He had not been summoned, but his arrival was instantaneous, as if he had sensed the threat in his territory. He was not dressed for battle, but he didn't need to be. His mere presence was a weapon. He walked toward Jet with a calm, deadly grace that made the Nightfang warriors instinctively take a step back. "Jet," Corbin said, his voice flat and cold, devoid of any greeting. "You are a long way from your lands. State your business and be quick about it." Jet puffed out his chest, trying to regain his swagger. "King Corbin, I've come to correct a mistake. You were overcome by the moment at the ritual. The moon can make even the strongest wolves a little crazy." He gave a dismissive wave toward Sasha. "I've come to take the girl back. She is a member of my pack, my responsibility. I'll relieve you of this burden." Sasha's blood ran cold. The thought of going back with Jet, of returning to that life of misery after having tasted this, it was a fate worse than never having left. Corbin didn't even glance at her. His focus was entirely on Jet, and the air in the hall grew thick and heavy with the pressure of his dominance. "There is no mistake," Corbin said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And she is not a burden. She is my chosen mate. You have no claim here. Your business is concluded. Leave." Jet's face darkened with fury. The smugness evaporated, replaced by raw, spiteful anger. "I will not be dismissed. She is nothing. A weak, broken thing. To have her as a mate shames you, and it shames the very title of Luna. I challenge you for her, Corbin. Right here, right now. Or are you too proud to fight for your human pet?" A collective gasp rippled through the Crimson Shadow Pack members who had gathered to watch. A direct challenge from one alpha to another was a deadly serious affair. By ancient law, it could not be refused. Corbin's eyes narrowed, the gray turning to chips of ice. He finally looked at Sasha, and in his gaze she saw not anger, but a fierce, protective certainty that made her heart clench. He looked back at Jet. "I accept your challenge." Panic, sharp and blinding, seized Sasha. "No." The word was out of her mouth before she could stop it, a desperate plea. She saw the hungry gleam in Jet's eyes, the way his warriors grinned. He was vicious and cruel in a fight. He would not fight fair. Corbin turned to her. The ice in his eyes melted, replaced by that same tender warmth from the mountain. The hall, the challengers, the watching pack, it all seemed to fade away for him. He crossed the space between them in a few strides and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was firm, grounding, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around them. "Sasha," he said, his voice low and for her alone. "Look at me." She did, her eyes wide with terror. "Do not be afraid for me. That man is nothing. A noisy gnat. He represents a world that tried to break you. I will not let that world touch you ever again." His thumb stroked her cheek. "Have faith in me." And then he did what he had not done on the mountain. He leaned in and captured her lips with his. It was not a gentle, exploratory kiss. It was a claiming. It was a promise. It was fierce and passionate and poured every ounce of his determination, his protection, and his burgeoning feeling for her into that one searing connection. Sasha's fear evaporated, burned away by the heat of his mouth on hers. Her hands came up, clutching the front of his tunic, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world spinning out of control. It was over too soon, but the impression it left was permanent, a brand on her soul. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers for a brief moment, his breath warm on her lips. "That was for luck," he murmured, his voice husky. Then he turned away from her, and the gentle lover was gone. In his place was the Alpha King, a warrior of legendary power. His eyes glowed with a faint gold light as he faced Jet, his body coiling with lethal intent. "To the challenge circle," he commanded, his voice echoing through the stone hall. "Let's get this over with." He strode toward the doors, the crowd parting before him, Jet and his warriors following with arrogant, foolish confidence. Sasha stood rooted to the spot, her lips still tingling, her heart now pounding for a completely different reason. The fight was on, and her world hung in the balance. The entire population of the Crimson Shadow stronghold seemed to pour out of the stone buildings and into the main courtyard, forming a wide, silent circle around the two alphas. The air was charged with a grim anticipation, thick enough to taste. Sasha stood at the front of the crowd, her hands clenched into fists so tight her nails bit into her palms. Marta stood protectively beside her, a steadying presence, but Sasha felt utterly alone in her terror. In the center of the makeshift arena, Corbin and Jet faced each other. They had both shed their tunics, standing bare-chested in the cold mountain air. The difference between them was stark. Corbin was all coiled, graceful power, his muscles defined and his posture relaxed yet ready, like a predator sure of its victory. Jet was bulkier, his strength more brutish, his face already twisted into a snarl of hatred. There was no ceremony, no signal. Jet launched himself forward with a roar, intending to end the fight quickly with overwhelming force. Corbin didn't meet the charge head-on. He moved with an impossible speed, sidestepping Jet's lunge with the grace of a dancer. He used Jet's own momentum against him, shoving him hard in the back and sending him stumbling past. The crowd let out a collective, low murmur. Jet snarled, spinning around, his eyes blazing with fury and humiliation. He charged again, and this time his fists flew, powerful, wild swings meant to bludgeon and break. Corbin blocked, parried, and dodged. He was a master of control, his movements economical and precise. A sharp block to deflect a punch aimed at his throat. A swift duck under a wild haymaker. He wasn't just fighting, he was analyzing, studying Jet's patterns, his weaknesses. The sharp crack of fist meeting forearm echoed in the courtyard. Sasha flinched with every impact, her heart in her throat. Corbin was faster, smarter, but Jet was relentless, a storm of pure malice. Jet, frustrated by his inability to land a solid blow, changed tactics. He feigned a stumble, and as Corbin moved in to press his advantage, Jet dropped low and swept a leg out, catching Corbin by surprise. Corbin hit the hard-packed earth with a grunt, and Jet was on him in an instant, his hands going for Corbin's throat. The crowd gasped. Sasha cried out, a strangled sound of pure fear. Corbin's hands came up, gripping Jet's wrists, holding back the crushing pressure. His muscles strained, the cords in his neck standing out. For a terrifying moment, it seemed Jet's greater weight would win. Jet's face was inches from Corbin's, spit flying from his lips as he snarled, "I'll break you, King, and then I'll take your little pet and break her too." The words, meant to enrage and distract, had the opposite effect. A terrifying calm settled over Corbin's features. His eyes, which had been focused and fierce, now glowed with that unearthly, brilliant gold. His wolf was rising to the surface. With a surge of power that seemed to come from the earth itself, he threw Jet off of him, sending the larger man sprawling backward into the dirt. Corbin was on his feet in an instant, his chest heaving, his gaze locked on Jet with a cold, predatory finality. The fight was over. Everyone could feel it. Jet, scrambling to his feet, knew it too. He saw his defeat in Corbin's eyes, and it enraged him. Instead of yielding, instead of accepting his loss with what little honor he had left, his own eyes darted past Corbin, landing on Sasha. A look of pure, venomous spite twisted his features. As Corbin took a step forward to end the challenge, Jet moved. But not toward the king. In a burst of desperate, cowardly speed, he lunged sideways out of the circle, straight toward Sasha. His hand was outstretched, claws unsheathed, aiming to slash her face, to mark the king's mate before he was dragged away in defeat. Time seemed to slow. Sasha saw the hatred in his eyes, saw the deadly arc of his claws coming toward her. She saw Corbin's head whip around, a roar of pure, unadulterated fury tearing from his throat as he realized he was too far away to intercept. She saw the shock and horror on the faces of the crowd. And in that frozen sliver of a second, something ancient and powerful deep within her, something that had slept her entire life, finally woke up. It wasn't a shift. There was no crack of bones, no sprouting of fur. It was a surge of pure, protective energy that exploded from her very core. A brilliant, shimmering silver light erupted from her body, so bright it made everyone shield their eyes. It formed a solid, pulsating shield between her and Jet's attacking form. Jet's claws connected with the light, and a sound like a thunderclap echoed through the courtyard. He was thrown backward as if he had been hit by a mountain, hurled through the air to land in a crumpled, unconscious heap 20 feet away. The silver light flickered once, twice, and then faded, sinking back into Sasha's skin, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and the stunned, utter silence of every single person present. Sasha stood perfectly still, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked down at her hands, which tingled with a strange, fading warmth. She had done that. She had no idea how or why, but she had done that. The silence was broken by the sound of running footsteps. Corbin was there, in front of her, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes wide not with fear but with awe. He looked her over frantically, checking for any injury. "Sasha? Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" She could only shake her head, her voice gone. She was trembling now, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her weak and confused. Corbin's expression shifted from concern to something else entirely. He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the very first time. He looked at the crumpled form of Jet, then back at her. The awe on his face was breathtaking. "Silver light," he whispered, his voice filled with reverence. "The stories are true. The protective light of the true Luna. It hasn't been seen in generations." He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "It awakens only for a mate with a pure heart, to protect her pack or her alpha. You weren't weak, Sasha. Your power was just waiting for the right moment to protect what is yours." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. He wasn't just holding his mate. He was holding a miracle. The crowd, finally breaking from its stupor, didn't cheer. They went to their knees. One by one, every warrior, every elder, every member of the Crimson Shadow Pack bowed their heads in a gesture of profound respect and acceptance. They weren't bowing to him. They were bowing to her. To their Luna. To her strength. The girl they had watched with suspicion had just saved herself with the power of legends, and in doing so, had proven her worth beyond any doubt. Sasha, buried in the safety of Corbin's embrace, finally understood. She wasn't the weak one. She had never been the weak one. She was just different. And her difference had just saved them all. The stronghold, which had been a place of silent judgment and wary observation, was transformed in the wake of Sasha's awakening. The air itself seemed different, lighter, charged with a new kind of respect that was now directed at her. Where before pack members had averted their eyes, they now met her gaze and offered deep, respectful nods. Where there had been whispers, there was now a reverent silence when she passed. She was no longer the strange human girl. She was the Luna who had summoned the legendary silver light. She had protected herself, and in the eyes of the pack, she had protected their king. She was one of them. Jet had been unceremoniously dragged away by his own humiliated warriors, banished from Crimson Shadow lands with a warning never to return. The threat was gone, but the energy it had unleashed remained, swirling around Sasha and Corbin like a gathering storm. That night, a formal feast was held in the Great Hall in celebration of the king's victory and, though unspoken, in honor of their new Luna. Sasha sat at Corbin's right hand at the high table, dressed in a gown of deep blue that Marta had produced for her. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, but for the first time the weight did not feel crushing. It felt acknowledging. Corbin was attentive, his hand often resting on the back of her chair, his gaze frequently drifting to her, warm with a pride that made her blush. But throughout the meal, beneath the surface of the celebration, a different current was flowing between them. Every brush of his hand against her arm as he passed her a plate, every time he leaned close to murmur something in her ear, sent a spark of electricity through her. The memory of their kiss before the fight was a constant, throbbing presence in her mind. The world had narrowed to the space between their two bodies, and the unspoken question hanging in the air was when, not if, that space would finally close. The feast ended. The pack began to disperse, returning to their homes within the stronghold walls, their laughter and conversations echoing through the stone hallways. Corbin rose and offered Sasha his hand. "Walk with me," he said, his voice low. It was not a request. She placed her hand in his, and he led her not toward the crowded courtyards, but up a narrow, winding staircase built into the wall of the great hall itself. It led to a private balcony overlooking the entire fortress and the moon-drenched valley beyond. The night was cold and clear, the sky a vast blanket of icy stars. The sounds of the pack faded away, leaving only the sigh of the wind and the rhythm of their own breathing. They stood side by side at the stone railing, looking out at the kingdom he ruled. His shoulder brushed against hers, a point of searing heat in the cool night air. "The silence suits you," he said quietly, not looking at her but at the view. "You don't try to fill it. You just exist within it. It's one of the first things I noticed about you." Sasha didn't know what to say. Her heart was beating so loudly she was sure he must be able to hear it. He turned to face her then, his body blocking out the world, his gaze intense and serious. "What happened today, with Jet, it changes nothing between us and it changes everything." He reached out and traced the line of her jaw with his fingertips, a touch so feather-light it made her shiver. "It changes nothing because my wolf knew you were strong from the moment he saw you. He didn't need a magical light to prove it." His voice dropped to a husky whisper. "But it changes everything because now you know it too. The doubt is gone. I can see it in your eyes." He was right. The feeling of that power surging through her, the rightness of it, had settled something deep within her soul. She was not an imposter in this world. She belonged here. With him. "Corbin," she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. That was all the invitation he needed. The control he had so carefully maintained finally shattered. He cupped her face in both hands and captured her mouth with his. This was nothing like the brief, fierce kiss from the challenge circle. That had been a promise. This was the fulfillment. This kiss was deep, hungry and possessive, yet infinitely tender. It was a kiss that spoke of waiting, of longing, of a desire that had been banked for too long. Sasha melted into him, her hands coming up to clutch at his shoulders, her body molding itself to the hard lines of his. She kissed him back with a newfound confidence, with all the passion and feeling she had kept locked away her entire life. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing raggedly. Corbin's eyes glowed with a soft gold light, his wolf close to the surface. I have waited, he breathed, his forehead resting against hers. I have tried to be patient. But I cannot wait any longer, Sasha. I need you. Not as a king needs a queen, but as a man needs his mate. Completely. He swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She buried her face in the curve of his neck, inhaling his scent, her arms wrapped tightly around him. He carried her down the stairs, through the silent, empty corridors of the sleeping stronghold, and into his chambers. His rooms were larger than hers, dominated by a huge bed piled with furs. A fire crackled in the hearth, painting the room in warm, dancing shadows. He set her down on her feet beside the bed, his hands moving to the fastenings of her gown. His movements were slow, deliberate, giving her every opportunity to stop him, his eyes never leaving hers, asking a silent question. Sasha reached up and placed her hand over his, stopping him. She saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes and she smiled, a slow, sure smile. "Let me," she whispered. With trembling but determined fingers, she began to undo the buttons of his shirt, pushing the fabric aside to reveal the hard plane of his chest. She leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss over his heart, feeling it hammer against her lips. He groaned, a low, deep sound of pleasure, and his hands came up to tangle in her hair. There were no more words. Clothes fell away discarded on the floor. The firelight played over their skin as they explored each other with hands and lips, learning the landscape of their bodies. His touch was everywhere, worshipful and demanding all at once, setting her nerves on fire. He was careful, so careful with her, until she arched against him, a silent plea for more. When he finally entered her, it was with a slow, aching gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. It was a feeling of completion, of a circle finally closing, of two halves becoming whole. The slight pain was fleeting, washed away by a wave of pleasure so intense it stole her breath. He moved within her, his rhythm a perfect, primal dance that she matched instinctively. The world outside, the stronghold, the pack, the past, ceased to exist. There was only this. Only him. Only the building, coiling tension that promised shattering release. She cried out his name as the climax tore through her, a wave of silver-bright pleasure that felt like her power awakening all over again. He followed her over the edge with a low, guttural groan, his body shuddering against hers, his arms holding her so tightly it felt as if he would never let go. Later, as they lay tangled together in the furs, skin slick with sweat, limbs intertwined, he propped himself up on one elbow. He looked down at her, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. He brushed the damp hair from her forehead, his touch infinitely tender. Then he leaned down, and his lips found the soft, sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. He kissed it once, softly, and then his teeth grazed her skin. There was a sharp, brief pain, a claiming bite that made her gasp, and then a warm, spreading feeling of connection that settled deep in her soul. The mate bond sealed forever. He licked the small wound gently, soothing it, and then kissed it again. "Mine," he whispered against her skin, his voice thick with emotion. "My mate. My Luna. My Sasha." She curled into him, her head on his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. The orphan was gone. The outcast was gone. Lying in the arms of her king, marked as his own, she was finally, completely home. The first light of dawn was a pale, delicate pink brushing the peaks of the mountains, slowly painting the stone walls of the royal den in soft hues of gold and rose. Inside the king's chambers, the world was still and quiet, save for the gentle crackle of dying embers in the hearth and the deep, even sound of Corbin's breathing. Sasha lay awake, her head pillowed on his chest, one of his arms a heavy, possessive weight across her waist. She listened to the steady rhythm of his heart, a strong, calming drumbeat against her ear. His scent, pine and frost in him, was all around her, on the furs, on her skin, woven into her very soul. The small, tender mark on her neck, the physical proof of his claim, throbbed with a faint, pleasant warmth, a constant humming reminder of the bond they had sealed in the night. She carefully extricated herself from his embrace, slipping from the bed and pulling on his discarded tunic, which hung to her knees. She padded silently to the balcony doors and pushed them open, stepping out into the cold, clear morning air. The world below was still mostly asleep, the fortress quiet. She looked out over the kingdom she had feared, the home she had never dreamed she would have. It didn't feel imposing or terrifying anymore. It felt like a part of her. The river was a silver ribbon, the forest a protective cloak. This was her world to care for, to protect, to lead beside him. She felt him before she heard him. A warmth at her back, and then his arms were sliding around her waist, pulling her back against the solid, familiar wall of his chest. He rested his chin on the top of her head, and they stood there in a comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher, bathing the valley in light. "You're awake early," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. "I wanted to see it," she said softly, leaning back into his embrace. "I wanted to see our home in the light." He tightened his arms around her. "Our home," he repeated, the words a vow. "It looks different now, doesn't it?" "It feels different," she agreed. Because she was different. The girl who had arrived here weeks ago, scared and alone, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her own strength, who was loved, who had a place and a purpose. Later that day, a formal gathering was called in the great hall. It was not a feast but a ceremony. Every member of the Crimson Shadow Pack was in attendance, the vast hall packed with bodies, all facing the high table. Sasha stood beside Corbin but no longer slightly behind him. She stood as his equal. She was dressed in a gown the color of the winter sky, and around her shoulders was a cloak of deep gray fur, the traditional sign of the Luna Queen. Corbin addressed his people, his voice ringing out clear and strong in the silent hall. He spoke of strength, not just of tooth and claw but of heart and spirit. He spoke of the future, of a united Packlands under a rule of fairness and protection. And then he turned to Sasha, taking her hand in his. "The moon goddess, in her infinite wisdom, did not give me a mirror of my own power," he announced, his words echoing the ones he had spoken that first night. "She gave me my balance. She gave me my heart. She gave me your Luna Queen." He lifted their joined hands. "I present to you Sasha of the Crimson Shadow Pack. My mate. My equal. Your queen." He turned to her, and in his eyes she saw a love so deep and so certain it took her breath away. He leaned in and kissed her, not a claiming kiss but a promise kiss, right there in front of everyone. The hall erupted. But it wasn't the confused silence or the wary whispers of before. It was a deafening, unified roar of approval. Warriors stomped their feet, a thunderous rhythm of acceptance. The sound was a physical force, a wave of love and loyalty that washed over her, and Sasha felt tears of pure, unadulterated joy well in her eyes. She was home. She was loved. She was theirs. As the cheers finally began to subside, Corbin kept her hand in his, leading her through the crowd as pack members reached out to gently touch her cloak, to offer their blessings, their smiles genuine and warm. They made their way to the main doors of the hall, which were thrown open to the afternoon sun. Standing there, having just arrived, was Bree, her face alight with excitement and a little bit of fear. Sasha let out a cry of joy and dropped Corbin's hand, running to her friend and pulling her into a tight embrace. "You came," Sasha exclaimed, laughing through her tears. "The Alpha King himself sent for me," Bree said, her eyes wide as she looked around the magnificent hall and the surrounding pack. "He said his Luna required her best friend." She pulled back, holding Sasha at arm's length, her eyes shining. "Look at you. A queen." "I'm still me," Sasha said, squeezing her hands. "I know," Bree replied, her smile softening. "That's the best part." Corbin approached, and Bree immediately dipped into a respectful curtsy, which he waved away. "There will be time for formalities later," he said, a genuine smile on his face. "For now, welcome to your new home, Bree. Your friend has missed you." He looked at Sasha, his gaze full of a quiet understanding. "I'll leave you two to talk." He moved away to speak with his beta, giving them space. Sasha watched him go, her heart so full she thought it might burst. He had done this for her. He had brought her past into her future, making her new world complete. She stood there in the sunlight, her best friend at her side, her people around her, and her king waiting for her. The mocking from the mating ritual was a distant, faded memory, a bad dream dispelled by the brilliant light of a new day. She was Sasha, the girl with no wolf, who had become Sasha, the Luna Queen, who held the legendary silver light in her soul. Her story had begun in laughter and tears, but it had found its happy ending in love, acceptance, and a power that had been inside her all along. And so, under the watchful eyes of the mountains and the gentle gaze of the sun, a new era began for the Crimson Shadow Pack, led by a king who had found his heart and a queen who had finally found her voice. Their tale of love, strength, and finding where you truly belong was one that would be told for generations to come. But every story must pause, if only for a moment. If you followed Sasha and Corbin on their journey from that first moment in the circle to this triumphant happy ending, and you want to ensure you never miss another tale of love, magic, and thrilling transformation in this world of powerful alphas and the extraordinary Lunas who stand beside them, then make sure to subscribe. New chapters, new stories, and new adventures await, just a notification away.